Nvidia's CEO is now saying that gamers are completely wrong, trying to defend DLSS5 after, I think it could be put mildly, the launch did not go according to their plan. So the overall reaction to the DLSS5 announcement yesterday seems to be overwhelmingly negative. Evidence for that would be if you look at the comments on anything discussing this. On my videos, I put out 2 yesterday, it seemed like at least 75% negative. And then the rest, some kind of mix of mild curiosity to positivity, but definitely overwhelmingly negative. Hardware Unboxed has a poll on their channel. They actually did 2, one yesterday at the initial reaction. Based on what you've seen so far from NVIDIA's examples, DLSS5 made games look better or worse, with 78% of respondents saying worse. And then they just posted right before I'm filming this, so there's fewer responses, 3.5 thousand versus the 28,000 responded to yesterday's. But with similar ratios, again, you could kind of say that the two average out to about an 80 to 20 ratio of thinking that DLSS5 makes games look worse rather than better. Now, why that's such a big deal is that as I said in my video yesterday, my second video yesterday, once more information was out about what this is doing, I think calling this DLSS is just completely wrong. They're trying to capitalize on the positive brand image of DLSS upscaling, but this does something completely different. I argued in my video yesterday that I think they should have just put this in the NVIDIA overlay as like a mod or filter you could apply to games to change the way they look, because that's what it's doing. It just changes the way a game looks. Now, NVIDIA clearly thought it made games look better, but the overall response seems to be overwhelmingly people think it looks worse. And why I think this is so important is because how do you actually judge it? Because it's not trying to do what DLSS upscaling does. Again, why I think it's completely misbranded here. Because DLSS upscaling is designed to improve the performance of a game. And then because you're lowering the internal rendering resolution, you have to check how well does it stay true to the native image of the game. So that's how you can judge DLSS upscaling. But DLSS 5, again, I really just don't think it should be called DLSS at all, is trying to do a completely different thing. It's literally just trying to change how the game looks using generative AI. And because that's its goal, its entire purpose is just to change the way a game looks. As far as we can tell, it's overall like a huge performance penalty. It's not trying to boost performance the way that other DLSS technologies seem to be more related to, by either upscaling rays or upscaling resolution, or I guess you could kind of call frame generation like upscaling temporally frame data. The point is, previous versions of DLSS had something to do with the frame rate of the game and trying to look similar to the native image, whereas this is literally just trying to make the game look different through generative AI at what seems to be a huge performance penalty, at least on current hardware. Digital Foundry said that the demo that they saw was running on 2 RTX 5090s, and by fall, when this is supposed to release, it would be hopefully down to 1 GPU. Anyway, so the point is, though, why I think it's so important to look at the public reaction to this is because this is actually the only way to judge the technology, is literally the subjective opinion of, do you think it makes the game look better, or does it make it look worse? Because that's really the only thing that matters with this technology other than the performance. So the performance side of this seems to be a net negative and sounding extremely so, at least in the tech demo version of it. So it doesn't make the game run better. The only thing it does is change the way the game looks. And because it's not trying to line up to a ground truth image in the way DLSS upscaling is trying to look like a native resolution when it lowers it at a lower internal resolution so you can compare it to the native image, this is literally entirely just subjectively changing the way a game looks. And since that is all it is doing, I think that literally the only way to judge it is, do people think that it made the game look better and better enough to justify any performance penalty? And at least based on the what has been shared so far, it seems like the overwhelming response has been no, it doesn't make the game look better, although some people are saying it does. I will say that like my initial impression of it looking at like one of the Starfield characters and in a still motion, non in video format, because my initial impression was when before a lot of the other stuff came out yesterday. Again, I had 2 videos out yesterday. Looking at how bad the Starfield character looked, and then this, and then you could make an argument for okay, the original Starfield character looks pretty bad, but when you look at a lot of the other stuff that's out now. A lot of what people are saying is, yeah, it just really has that kind of, stable diffusion look, especially like early versions of it. Looks like there's an Instagram filter pass. Why is she suddenly wearing makeup and seems to have lip filler now? So there's a lot of criticism of the damaging the artistic intent of the game. Is this what they're actually supposed to look like? Is this what game developers wanted for the mood of the scene? Because if the generative AI doesn't understand the mood that the developers are trying to give off by the look of a scene, if it doesn't understand that, and it's not, then it's kind of, destroying the look of the game. So even though I think most people would say there's more of a hyper real look to the output, that doesn't mean people think it looks better, right? Because there's more to the image looking good and fitting a game than just how hyper real or how photorealistic does it look, right? So again, because literally all this is doing is changing the way a game looks in a way that clearly Nvidia thought was objectively better. Well, the thing is, you can't really measure that objectively. All you have is the subjective opinion. Do people think it looks better? And the answer seems to be no. Like I said, the comment ratio on my video seems to be pretty close to the hardware unbox poll here, 80-20-ish. I didn't add up all the positive, negative comments on my channel. I didn't run a poll, but it seems pretty similar. Also seems pretty similar on anywhere else I've looked at about this. So really, like, that's my whole thing, is it almost doesn't matter what Jensen Huang says. Now, we'll hear him out, but in the end, because this technology is not boosting performance, and it's not trying to look like a ground truth native image, it's just changing the way the game looks through generative AI. If people don't think it looks better, then it has failed, okay? Now, I'll also say with the backlash against this, there does seem to be kind of 2 camps to the backlash, although there's a lot of overlap between them. It seems like, reading through the comments, some people are just flat out opposed to the use of generative AI in this manner, regardless of how it looks, whereas other people don't seem opposed to using generative AI in this manner, but just don't think it looks good. So that's the other thing with this, is like, so can the situation be saved from the Nvidia perspective? So I think from the perspective of people who just think that using generative AI in this manner is just somehow morally wrong, or just not what they want to see in video games, etc., then you would have to change their mind on that opinion. And those people seem to have some very strong opinions. So all I got to say is, good luck. It's going to be pretty hard to change those opinions. And just the overall public response to AI in general right now, a lot of people are feeling like this is going to destroy the economy. It's taking jobs. Like, there's a lot of just negative sentiment about generative AI, period, regardless of its effectiveness or its look. Do you see what I'm saying? So there's that camp of people. And then there's the people who aren't opposed to using generative AI to try to make a game look better, but they just didn't think it looked better. So I think when we look at this camp of it's worse, I think you've kind of got some split between those, and I'm not quite sure where the ratios are on that. So I think that's where we're at with the summary of what seems to be the public reaction to DLSS5. So we've set the stage. Although I should also mention, I'm a statistics teacher, so I just feel like I was going to brush this off, and I just can't. Okay, so I should also mention that when we're looking at like comments on my channel, or a poll on Hardware Unboxed channel, or really literally any article about this, it is important to note that what we're sampling here when we're getting these opinions and like looking at these ratios is we're looking at the subset of PC gaming enthusiasts. because those are the people who are responding to a Hardware Unboxed poll or watching one of my videos on this topic and not only choosing to watch it, but also to write a comment. Right? So these are the people who are the like ultra enthusiast and want their opinions heard. Whereas, I'm just a high school teacher, right? So I have gamers in my classrooms. As far as I know, not a single one of them is even aware that DLSS5 was announced yesterday, right? So it is important to also think about the context of the total gaming population, where it's harder to get a read on it and whether they would follow these same ratios. I'm just pointing this out as a statistics teacher. I'm not saying that they would like it more or like it worse or would fall into the same. I'm saying we honestly just don't have data on that. And I feel like as a statistics teacher, it's important to point that out, that what we're looking at is the subset of ultra enthusiast PC gamers, and we don't really know the opinion of the average gamer because most of them are unaware that this has even been announced, let alone have formed any sort of opinion on it. So that would be kind of interesting, would be getting, just as additional data, it would be just getting like a blind test of random gamers. I'm just kind of thinking from a statistics perspective, just to get more data on how would you judge this, right? Anyway, so here is what the Nvidia CEO says. So in response to all of that context that I've thrown out here, the accusations that it destroys artistic intent, that it just looks worse, that we don't want generative AI choosing what the game looks like, etc., this is the response. So NVIDIA's CEO, speaking to Tom's Hardware at GTC 2026 at a press Q&A, has said, well, first of all, they're completely wrong, talking about all the gamers who have this this opinion on whether DLSS5 is making the game look better or destroying artistic intent. A lot of this focusing on like how Grace in Resident Evil Requiem suddenly seems to be wearing lipstick and having lip filler. Feels like you're destroying the artistic intent for what that was designed to look like. Also, some people mentioning that like seems like the volumetric fog in the background is gone because like, can the AI actually understand the intent of this scene, the emotion it's supposed to convey, or is it just taking these inputs, running it through, make her look hot filter, or whatever it's set to, and this is what it spits out, right? Because it certainly looks very different than the original game. Anyway, so in that context, his response is, all those accusations, people making those accusations, especially of destroying artistic intent, he says they're all completely wrong. He says the reason for that, the reason why they are wrong, is because, as I have explained very carefully, DLSS5 fuses controllability of the geometry and textures and everything about the game with generative AI. So he's saying it fuses generative AI with controllability of the geometry and textures and everything about the game. So he's saying that there is controllability to the output of the generative AI by controlling the geometry, textures, and everything about the game. He also added that developers can still fine-tune the generative AI to make it match their style, saying that DLSS5 adds generative capability to the existing geometry of the game, but that it doesn't change the artistic control. So, I really want to see from the developer's side actually what the controls for this look like. I am very curious how much control over this they have. However, as I said in my second video yesterday, I also question if this thing is extremely heavy to run, if the population of gamers that are actually having hardware where they would be using this is incredibly small, like how much game developer time would be spent trying to make sure that the generative AI is actually matching their artistic intent in every scene of the game versus just, okay, we've added in the our game as inputs. Let's tweak a couple of settings so it feels good and then not spend a bunch of developer time on this. So in other words, what I'm saying here is it's unclear at this point exactly how much fine-tuning the developers can do, although clearly there is some. But even if there is a lot, I question how much developer time would want to be spent because time is money. Developer time is money. to fine-tune it to match the developer's intent? That's a big question here. Now, the other thing I'll say on this is it does seem to be the case that AMD, in their partnership with Sony, with the PlayStation 6, and with Microsoft, with Project Helix, both of those announcements and what we have so far have mentioned neural rendering. And it's unclear if they're also planning this style of generative AI use in game graphics. They're certainly talking about some forms of neural rendering, but we've seen other demos of technologies that are more like neural textures, where you can do some work on what the texture should be and run it through a neural network, get a predictable output, but using way less VRAM, that kind of thing. So we've seen white papers and some demos on that type of a thing. And we've also seen neural materials, similar kind of an idea. Whereas this seems to be something completely different. So it's unclear if what AMD, with their work with Sony and Microsoft, are planning is something more just like neural textures and neural materials, or more like this, which I was going to say what this feels like is that the game frame gets generated, and then you just take that 2D image and run it through like a AI pass to say, whatever controls you're putting on it. Apparently, the developers have some sort of a control over that, and then it outputs image, and there you go. And then it runs that fast enough, where I also question what is the latency penalty on this, if that's what it's doing. If you have to render the first game engine first and then output a generative AI version of that frame, and then that's what shows up on the display, what else is the latency penalty on that, let alone the performance cost on the GPU? That's just another side note question I have about all of this. But anyway, it's unclear if, the Sony and Microsoft versions are planning this kind of thing. Although, while I have said that what I just described there feels like what's happening here, and it certainly looks like what's happening here, this last comment from the Nvidia CEO seems to be denying that that's what is happening here. He says it is not post-processing. It's not post-processing at the frame level. It's generative control at the geometry level, is what he said. Okay, so he's saying that. Now, I've got to say, the evidence of my eyes, and apparently also according to the comments in the polls, most gamers' eyes, the evidence seems to be that this certainly looks like what you would get if you fed this image into a generative AI and describe some of how you want the scene to change. Give me a photorealistic look with more makeup. That kind of feels like what you're getting here out of like a stable diffusion model, that kind of a thing. But he is directly denying that that is what it's doing. He is saying that it is generative AI, but that it's not happening at a frame level as post-processing. He's saying it's generative control at the geometry level. Now, I'm just curious what that means. Because one place where I am interested in neural rendering personally, and this is what I initially thought this was when all I had to go off of was Digital Foundry's first video. But then once there was more information out there, I was more like, oh. Initially, it sounded like it was using neural networks to help understand how the light interacts with the geometry of the scene. I think that assisting path tracing through a neural network to better understand how light interacts with the geometry of a scene, to me, that actually sounds very interesting, and that would not end up with a AI Instagram filter look on a character. It would be the same character. It would just literally be lit better if the AI helped it understand the lighting. That was what I initially thought this was in my first video after just getting the Digital Foundry take, because again, it was several hours later that the additional information came out from NVIDIA. So if they're capable of doing that kind of thing, I think people would be less opposed to that. I know personally I would be less opposed to that. But what we're actually seeing certainly looks like what he is claiming this isn't. He's claiming it isn't just taking this frame as like a 2D image and applying post-processing to it as a generative AI image filter. that's certainly what it looks like we're getting. So if there actually is some kind of understanding of the geometry in light happening, that's interesting to me. But that certainly doesn't seem to be what we are actually seeing happen. So in general, like my overall thoughts is that like neural rendering in and of itself, like I said, like I'm interested in neural textures. I'm interested in neural materials. I'm interested in can AI help the game understand how light is interacting with the geometry better. Those things are interesting to me. And again, all signs point to neural rendering being where all of the big players are pushing towards in the next few years. But just like what appears to be, although it's claimed it isn't, a generative AI post-processing on a 2D frame to get us this frame, that doesn't seem great to me, and clearly doesn't seem to be great to most people. So that's kind of, I think, where we're at this point. So anyway, I would be certainly interested in more information on what actually fine-tuning control is available to developers. And if it's not just post-processing a generative AI on the output frame, and what actually is it doing at the geometry level? I'm just curious about that. I would like, is there a white paper on this? I would like to know more about what this is actually doing. And like I said, this technology in and of itself, if they just chose not to call this DLSS5, and instead they just say, okay, we get the backlash. Like, in other words, let me say how I think the CEO maybe should have responded here is, okay, we get the backlash. We thought you guys were going to love this. You didn't. So instead of calling it DLSS5, we have realized that this isn't really fitting into our DLSS branding of increasing performance in games. It's really something else. But we do, I'm trying to give the Nvidia perspective here, right? We do think that this is something that people might actually be sold on. You might end up actually liking this once you get it in a game. So, we're still going to put it out there, but we'll add it to the Nvidia app overlay as a filter. Or maybe they don't want to call it a filter, so maybe it can be its own thing. Maybe they can have a neural rendering, technique or whatever they want to call it in the menu. And then maybe they give the end user some of these fine-tuning controls, because the PC gaming community in general seems to be overall positive about modding games and doing visual mods to games. So if this had been presented more as a modding tool where you could change the way your game looks and you can tune the controls of that, I think there would have been a very different response than what we're getting here. Anyway, so I am curious, where are you guys at with this? Is this representative of where you're at with it now? Has Jensen Huang calling you completely wrong changed your opinion? What are your overall questions on this that still remain? Because certainly I think there's a lot we don't know at this point. And including, like, is it ever going to get to a point where it's not running on 25090s? Because realistically, all of this is sort of irrelevant to almost everybody until it can actually run on hardware people can realistically afford. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comment section. I plan on, people have been asking me if I'm going to benchmark Crimson Desert. I don't have early review access to the game. I emailed the devs but didn't get a response. I don't even know if I had the right email, so whatever. So I will buy the game when it comes out, and I do plan on benchmarking it. I don't know if that'll be day one or if it'll take me longer. We'll have to see. I am pretty busy this week. But I certainly intend to have Crimson Desert benchmarks on the channel soon, at least within a day or two of the game launching. And I hope all of you have an excellent day.